Story 1. The Light Behind the Broken Window. It was the summer before I turned 17 when my uncle asked me to watch over his old farmhouse out in Madison County. Said he'd be gone for 3 weeks on a fishing trip down near Guntersville and needed someone to keep an eye on things. I didn't have much else going on, and the idea of having a whole place to myself, even if it was buried in the middle of nowhere, sounded like a good time. He tossed me the keys and warned, real casual-like, "Don't worry about the second floor. It creaks too much anyway." I remember laughing, thinking he meant it structurally, like the boards might give under my weight. Looking back, I think he was trying to say something else without really saying it. The house was tucked behind a veil of overgrowth, like it had been slowly swallowed by the forest over the years. It sat quiet and wide under a sagging tin roof. White paint blistered off in patches. The porch groaned when I stepped on it, and the front door stuck like it hadn't been opened in a long while. Inside, the air had a kind of stillness I didn't know to be afraid of yet. Not stale, not musty, just waiting. The place had no AC, just a few box fans my uncle had set up in the hallways. Downstairs was livable. Kitchen, bathroom, a back den with a fold-out couch that smelled faintly of mothballs and pine cleaner. The upstairs was off-limits in my mind from the start, more out of respect for his words than fear. I never felt like going up there anyway. The first night, everything seemed fine. I had a frozen pizza and watched a VHS I found in a crate labeled, "Don't Throw Out." Around 10 p.m, I flicked off the lights and stretched out on the fold-out, listening to the hum of the fan and the chorus of crickets through the screen door. That's when I noticed the light. Just a soft yellow square glowing in the trees across the gravel drive. I stood up and leaned out the door to get a better look. It was coming from upstairs, the far right window, the one with the pane that was cracked through the middle like a spider web. It glowed like someone had turned on a bedside lamp up there. I squinted, tried to convince myself maybe I'd left it on without noticing. But I hadn't even gone upstairs. I went back inside and flipped the main breakers in the kitchen pantry. The whole house went dark, waited a few minutes. When I stepped back outside, the light was off. That should have been the end of it. The next night, same time, 10 p.m, the light came on again. I was already watching for it, sitting on the porch swing with a flashlight in my lap like that would somehow help. There it was, like clockwork. Same window, same yellow glow. I walked inside, checked the breakers. Off. I unscrewed every bulb upstairs I could reach on the first day. I hadn't touched the second floor. I stared at the ceiling above me for a long time that night, hearing soft creaks, like someone shifting their weight on bare floorboards. That old kind of creak, slow and steady, like it belonged to someone who knew the house better than me. By the third night, I didn't sleep. Just sat out on the porch and stared at that damn window. Around 9:53 p.m, the light flickered on. No sound, no shadows, just that steady, sickly yellow glow. I walked to the end of the driveway and looked back. From that angle, you could see more clearly into the window. There was a bed in there, I think, maybe a dresser, but the light source was always low, hidden. It made everything up there feel like a stage someone was setting every night just for me. I tried to tell my uncle over the phone, but the reception was awful. I got half my sentence out before the call dropped. The next few nights, I left before sundown and didn't come back until morning. Slept in my truck at a gas station down the road. Something about the house just felt wrong after dark, like it didn't want me there anymore. Then, about a week in, I got bold, or stupid, depending how you look at it. I waited for the light. 10 p.m. sharp, it came on. I grabbed my flashlight, my pocket knife, like that would matter, and started up the stairs. Each step moaned under me like the wood was trying to warn me off. At the top, I turned right, heart in my throat. The hallway stretched long and narrow, ending at the room with the glowing window. The door was open with just a crack. I pushed it slowly. There was no light, no lamp, no bulb, just moonlight filtering through the cracked glass. The room was bare, no bed, no dresser, just old wallpaper peeling in thin curls. I stood there in that silence for a long while, a flashlight beam trembling in my hand. Then I turned and left. I never went back upstairs after that. But the light didn't stop. Even with no electricity, no bulb, no lamp, the light still came on. Every night, that same window. At first I thought maybe it was a trick of reflection or something in the glass, but it wasn't. The glow changed slightly each night, sometimes dimmer, sometimes brighter. One night I thought I saw movement behind the curtain, like something brushing past. That's when I started locking my door from the inside and pushing a chair under the handle. Last night, the light didn't come on. That sounds like it should have been a relief, but it wasn't. Around 2 a.m. I woke up in a cold sweat. No fan hum, no crickets, just silence. I got up and cracked the door open. The house was darker than I'd ever seen it. Felt heavier somehow, like the air had thickened. I crept onto the porch and looked up at the window. No light, but there was something there. A silhouette, not moving. Just there. Standing behind the broken glass. The shape of a person, unmoving, watching. No light to illuminate them, just the shape cut against the pale night sky. I stared for what felt like hours. My throat is dry. My heart slow and sick. Then, slowly, the figure leaned forward. Not a twitch, not a stumble, just a slow, intentional lean, like it was pressing its face against the glass. I stepped back and the porch groaned beneath me. The figure stepped back too. I went inside and locked everything. I didn't sleep, just wait. When the sun came up, the figure was gone. I left that morning. Didn't pack, just drove. I called my uncle and told him I couldn't do it anymore. He didn't ask why, just said, "Yeah, I didn't think you'd last the whole time." When I asked what he meant, he went quiet, then said, "Some houses don't empty out just 'cause the people leave." I haven't been back. I've seen the place since though, once or twice, just passing on the back roads, still there, tucked in the trees, still peeling, still silent. But the window, that cracked window, it still glows some nights when you drive by slowly, and sometimes, if you stop and look long enough, the light doesn't turn off when you blink. Story 2. The chimney that whispers after rain. We needed a break from Atlanta. Too many sirens, too many people talking at once, too many blinking lights from things we didn't need. So when we found this little rental way up near Burnsville, a bare-bones cabin tucked deep into the Blue Ridge, we jumped on it. My partner Ellie was halfway through nursing school, and I'd just gotten laid off from a warehouse gig. We figured a few days with no reception, no email, no pressure might be exactly what we needed to remember how to breathe again. The cabin was smaller than it looked in the photos, just a single-story box with grey wood siding, a rusted tin roof, and a front porch big enough for 2 chairs and a cooler. Inside was simple. A living room with an old floral couch, a half-working kitchen, and a stone fireplace that took up most of one wall. The bedroom had no door, just a curtain, and the bed sagged in the middle, like someone had lived and died on it. We didn't care. It was quiet. You could stand on the porch and hear nothing but wind through trees that hadn't been touched in decades. The rain came the second night. Not hard at first, just a slow drizzle tapping against the tin roof like someone fingering piano keys. I remember thinking it was peaceful, almost hypnotic. But the longer it rained, the more the world shrunk. The gravel road that led up to the cabin turned to thick red clay by the 3rd day. Our tires sunk in. We weren't going anywhere until it dried. By then, the forest had started to change. It was Ellie who pointed it out first. She said the trees sounded different, like the wind was moving inside them instead of through. I didn't know what that meant, but she said it like a fact, not a feeling. We'd sit in the living room playing old card games, reading, letting the fire die down because we didn't want to smoke up the place. That's when the chimney started whispering. It wasn't loud, barely there really, just a soft rustling sound that came from the fireplace whenever it rained. The first time I brushed it off as water slipped down the flue, but it had a rhythm to it, like words. I joked that the house was lonely and tried to join the conversation. Ellie didn't laugh. She tilted her head like she was trying to catch something beneath it. "Do you hear it repeating?" she said. By the fourth night, the rain hadn't stopped, and the whispering was clearer. I stayed up late watching an old VHS I'd found in a drawer labeled Misk. Ellie had gone to bed early, tired but distant. Around 1 a.m., as the storm beat harder against the windows, I muted the TV and listened. The fireplace was alive with it, something wet and breathy moving behind the stone, and I swear I heard my name, just once, clear as anything, soft but direct. I walked over and crouched near the hearth. The ash inside was undisturbed. No signs of animal tracks or droppings. The flue was open, but the opening led into black so deep it felt like looking into a throat. I leaned in, flashlight shaking, but nothing moved. Then, right in my ear, I heard it. "Matthew!" A rasp. Female but cracked in half, like the voice box was wrong. I stumbled back and slammed the metal gate shut. The whispering stopped. Ellie was already sitting up in bed when I came in. She looked pale, cold. "I heard it too," she whispered. She didn't sleep that night. Neither did I. The next morning I dug around for a recorder. My old field mic was still in the car from a podcast project I never finished. I ran a cable and set it right next to the hearth, wrapped in a towel to buffer the wind noise. That evening, the rain returned in a wave, heavier than before. The cabin creaked and popped, like its bones were shifting under the pressure. Ellie stayed in the bedroom, reading silently, not looking up. Around 11 p.m., the whispering came again. I didn't say a word, just sat on the couch and watched the fireless hearth flicker with shadows. It started soft, like before, but then it built. Not louder exactly, but closer, like something was pushing forward behind the stone, moving its lips against the old brick. The voice started mumbling, broken syllables that meant nothing. Then, after a long pause, it repeated something I'd said to Ellie 2 nights earlier, word for word. "This place smells like wet cedar and old memories." Same tone. Same pacing. It didn't mimic. It was memorable. I hit a record. For 30 minutes, I sat still, breathing shallow. The voice changed pitch, sometimes low and guttural, sometimes shrill like breath through cracked teeth, but always just under the threshold, like it wanted to be heard but not quite understood. Then, at 12:17 a.m., it said something else. "Don't go back to the car." I froze. I hadn't spoken that phrase, not once. I didn't sleep that night either. The next morning, the rain paused for maybe an hour. I grabbed my recorder and played the audio back with headphones. It started with static, light thumps as I shifted on the couch. Then the whispering, clearer than I expected. More layers than I remembered. At first it was gibberish, but then I heard myself. Full sentences, conversations I'd had with Ellie, private ones, all strung together in that same fragmented voice. And then something else, something that didn't sound like either of us. A second voice. This one is lower, gravelled, harder to hear, but it was trying to mimic. It repeated parts of what I'd said, but warped, like a parrot trying to form words it didn't understand. I sat there with my headphones on, sweating, as this broken voice repeated, "Smells like, wet, see, there." Then silence. Then, just before the tape ended, it whispered my name again. drawn out, slurred. Math. You. When I took the headphones off, the cabin felt colder. Ellie was still in bed. Eyes open, she hadn't moved in hours. I sat beside her and asked if she heard it too. She nodded but didn't speak, just pulled the blanket over her chest and closed her eyes like she was trying to disappear. That evening, I packed our bags. Rain or not, I wasn't staying another night. I told Ellie we'd make a run for it in the morning, first light. But around 3 a.m., something woke me. Not a sound, not a light, just a feeling. Like I'd been pulled from sleep by something standing close. I sat up and looked toward the hearth. The fireplace gate was open. I swear to this day, I locked it. And there, on the stone floor, were 2 wet footprints. Bare, small, leading into the living room and stopping halfway, where they vanished. I didn't wake Ellie. I just watched the door until the sun rose. We left as soon as the rain eased. The car struggled down the muddy trail, but we made it back to asphalt. Neither of us spoke. Not until we saw the highway. Ellie finally asked, "Did you close the flue?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. I still have the audio. I've played it for 2 sound techs I trust. One told me it was interference from metal piping, maybe distortion from the rain hitting certain frequencies. The other just handed me back the recorder and said, "That doesn't sound like wind." Ellie and I didn't last long after the trip. She moved to Knoxville. I stayed in Atlanta. Sometimes we text, never about the cabin, but every so often when it rains heavily. I'll wake up in my apartment and hear something in the walls. Not a whisper, not exactly. More like a voice I forgot saying something I haven't said yet. Story 3, the woman in the basement there. When my cousin Paul bought that old Victorian just outside of Boone, I thought he'd lost his mind. The thing was practically rotting into the hillside. The porch was slanted like it was bowing under some invisible weight. The shutters were falling off. But Paul, he was beaming, said it was the deal of the decade, a true fixer-upper. He was always like that though, had a knack for seeing what something could be instead of what it was. I respected it, even if I didn't always understand it. The place had good bones, I guess. Real tall ceilings, old crown moldings. And then there was the basement. The first time I stepped into that house, the smell hit me hard. Like damp stone and something underneath that. Something organic, almost sour, but faint enough that you could lie to yourself about it. Paul said it was just old pipes and mildew. Got a dehumidifier coming next week, he promised. The wallpaper was the worst part. Some pale yellow stuff with vines printed on it, like it belonged in a nursery. It was peeling in long curls, especially near the floor, and always looked wet, even when everything else felt dry. We were down there one Saturday afternoon, replacing some fuses after half the upstairs lights shorted out. I followed him into the basement even though I didn't want to. There was something about that stairwell, a steep, narrow thing, hugged tight by brick, that made you feel like you were descending into something older than the house itself. The air was colder but not fresh. It didn't move right. It pressed against your face like someone was leaning in too close. Paul didn't notice. He was always charging ahead, never one to spook easy. The main part of the basement was stone and dirt, with a few wood shelves and boxes left by the previous owner. The fuse box was bolted to a post near the back, barely lit by a single bulb that flickered like it had second thoughts about being on. While he was digging around for the blown fuse, I felt something change. Not heard, felt, like static under my skin. I turned my head toward the far corner, behind some old paint cans stacked 3 high. She was standing there, not moving, not swaying, just there. She looked like a woman, but her skin was the color of old stone, pale grey with hints of something blue underneath, like veins rising too close to the surface. Her hair was long and flat, clinging to her face like wet moss. And her eyes, if they were eyes, were wide and still. She looked like a photograph, like something someone had captured mid-sentence and forgotten to develop. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe, my body just locked. Paul must have said something because he turned and looked at me, asked if I was okay. I nodded without turning my head, still staring at her. But when I blinked, just once, she was gone. I didn't say anything then, just made up an excuse and went back upstairs, pretended I had a headache. Paul didn't push. He was too busy with his renovation plans to notice my hands shaking. Over the next few weeks, I avoided the place as best I could, but Paul kept inviting me over, always needing help lifting something or rewiring or measuring walls. I went because he was family, but I never went into that basement again. I stayed upstairs, where the air moved the way it should. Still, even on the main floor, I'd catch little things. Wet footprints on dry hardwood, the dehumidifier turned off for no reason. Once, I found a single black hair in the kitchen sink, curled like it had been left there on purpose. Paul didn't have black hair. Neither did I. Then came the night he called me in a panic. Said he fell down the basement stairs. Said something pushed him. I drove over in the rain, headlights carving up the driveway like a knife through mud. Found him sitting on the bottom step, holding his ankle. No break, just a bad sprain. He looked pale, rattled, not like Paul at all. She touched me, he kept saying, cold hands, both sides of my ribs, just pushed. I didn't want to ask, but I had to. I asked what she looked like. He frowned. I didn't see her, he said, but the hands were grey, like stone, like marble left out in the cold. I helped him upstairs. He didn't argue, just leaned on me like a kid. I stayed with him that night, in the guest room. I couldn't sleep. The rain didn't help. The house made sounds I'd never heard before, cracks in the walls like breathing. That same too heavy air leaking up from the vents. Around 2 a.m. I got up to check on him. His door was cracked open. I peeked in. He was asleep. But standing just beyond the foot of the bed was her. That same woman. Same pale skin. Same hair, dripping down over her face like a veil. She wasn't looking at him, she was looking at me. I didn't blink this time. I backed out of the room and shut the door. Locked myself in the guest room and sat in the corner until sunrise. Paul moved out a week later, told people it was because the renovations were more than he could handle. Sold the house at a loss to some out-of-state couple with a Pinterest board full of before and after ideas. They repainted, tore out the wallpaper, installed recessed lighting, but I've driven by a few times since, and every now and then I see something in that basement window, just for a second, just when the sun hits it at the right angle. A face that doesn't move, don't blink, waiting. I don't think she ever left. I think she wasn't meant to leave, like the house built itself around her, stone by stone, and now she's just part of it, breathing in the walls, under the floor, behind the fuse box. Sometimes, when the air feels still and wrong, I hear it again, the sound of someone breathing too close to my ear. And I remember that heavy stillness, that basement air that didn't move unless she moved with it. Story 4. The house that left no footprints. We'd been hiking the Appalachian stretch near Linville Gorge, me and 2 old friends from high school, James and Tyler. It was meant to be one of those reconnect with nature, clear your head kind of trips. James had just gone through a nasty divorce, and Tyler was dealing with burnout from working 12-hour shifts at a warehouse outside Asheville. I didn't have much of an excuse, except I missed them, and I missed the mountains. We packed light, brought a topo map, and planned to follow the trail for 3 days, camp off path, then loop back. Simple. Familiar. We'd done it a dozen times in our 20s. The only difference now was that our knees popped more. And we brought whiskey instead of weed. It was on the second day that the weather shifted. The forecast had called for light rain, but sometime around mid-afternoon the wind picked up, and within the hour we were drenched. The trail turned to mud, and the ridgelines disappeared behind walls of mist. Tyler slipped twice, and we started talking about heading down toward the creek to find level ground and maybe throw a tarp. That's when James spotted the cabin. It wasn't on the map, wasn't marked, just appeared through the trees like it had always been there. Small, square, built low to the ground with a wide front porch and shuttered windows. It looked like a ranger's shelter, maybe an old survey station. The steps were mossy but solid, and when we knocked, the door creaked open on its own. Inside was clean, like weirdly clean. No dust, no cobwebs. 2 bunks with made beds, a wood stove with a full stack next to it, and a table with a lantern set in the center like someone had just walked out to gather water. We stood there dripping in the doorway for a minute, not sure if we were trespassing, but there was no sign of anyone. Just silence, and that strange scent of pine and something sweeter, like dried honeysuckle. We decided to wait out the storm just one night, built a small fire in the stove, hung our wet gear from nails on the wall. We talked a little, laughed about the luck of it, and drank half the whiskey, but James kept glancing at the windows. Said he didn't like how clear the glass was. Said it felt like something was watching back. Tyler and I figured he was just being dramatic, but around midnight I got up to use the tree line and noticed the air felt wrong, like the humidity had dropped but the pressure hadn't. My ears popped when I stepped off the porch and the woods around us were silent. No frogs, no crickets, just our cabin, standing too still in a forest that suddenly didn't feel familiar. The next morning, everything had changed. The storm had passed. The sun was out, but the trail was gone. Not just overgrown, gone, replaced by thick brush and trees that didn't match what we'd seen the day before. No blaze marks, no packed dirt, just wilderness in every direction. I pulled out the map, but it was useless. Elevation didn't match, and the creek we'd followed had vanished. Tyler climbed a ridge to get a look around and came back pale. Said the tree line didn't look right, said the ridge wasn't supposed to be there. We agreed to backtrack, try to retrace our steps, follow the sun west and pick up the road. We packed our gear, double-checked the cabin and stepped outside. The cabin was gone. I mean it, gone. We stood there in the same place, backpacks on, staring at moss. No clearing, no foundation, no chimney, no porch, no nails in trees, just moss-covered stones and a patch of ground that felt too quiet. I walked in a circle, convinced I'd made some mistake, that maybe we'd come out a different door or turned wrong, but there was nothing. Tyler got real quiet. James looked like he was going to puke. We tried walking west, found a creek, but it was shallow and ran the wrong direction. No trail, just forest that didn't feel mapped. The trees looked older, thicker. Their bark was dark and flaky, and their roots stuck up like ribs through the soil. We walked all day and made no progress. Every hill led to another dip. Every direction looked the same. No birds, no planes, just the sound of our own boots in the brush and the wind circling above. That night, we didn't talk much. Built a fire with dry bark, huddled around it like kids on a dare. James refused to face the woods. Said he thought he saw movement earlier, someone pacing between the trees, not hiding, just watching. I asked what kind of movement. He didn't answer. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to Tyler shaking my shoulder. "You hear that?" he whispered. I listened. It was humming, real soft, real low, like someone humming to themselves a few feet away but just behind a wall. It came and went, like the sound was being carried by a breeze that didn't move the leaves. I thought maybe it was wind in the trees, until I heard the door. The door that wasn't there. A single creak, like hinges under pressure, then wood on wood. Something had opened. I stood slowly, heart in my throat, and turned to where the cabin had been. And I swear to this day, I saw a window. Just the faint outline of one, floating in the dark, yellow light behind it, and in the light, a silhouette, thin, still, facing outward, like someone waiting for us to come back inside. Then it blinked out, gone again. We didn't sleep after that, just sat, backs to the fire, until morning. The next day, James wouldn't speak. He kept glancing over his shoulder like something was close. When I tried to ask him what he saw, he just shook his head. Later that afternoon, he wandered off, just stepped away while we were filling canteens and didn't return. We found him an hour later standing in a dry creek bed, barefoot, face blank. He wouldn't say where his shoes went, wouldn't say anything. On the 5th day, we found a service road. We didn't cheer, we didn't celebrate, just followed it in silence until we saw a truck, then a gas station. The man behind the counter said we were 40 miles off course, east of where we'd started. No way we could have walked that far, not with the time we lost, not with how the sun barely moved. Tyler and I still talk sometimes, about work, about family, but never about the cabin, not really. He refuses to go hiking now, sold all his gear, said he has dreams where the window comes back, that the yellow light never stops flickering, that there's someone inside holding the door open just a crack. James moved to Florida. Last I heard, he's doing all right. But I got a postcard last year, with no return address. Just one sentence written in shaky handwriting. It still remembers my name. I burned it in my sink, but I kept the ashes. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if we'd stayed just one more night, if we'd gone back inside, if the door had been open wider. And sometimes when I'm walking alone at dusk, I get the sense I've seen that light again. Not ahead of me, behind, like something is still watching, still waiting. And it never left footprints, because it never had to. Story 5, Screams Between the Walls at Dusk. I took the job in Wilkes County because I needed the money, plain and simple. It wasn't the kind of work I usually did, but when the highway department called looking for someone to resurvey some back roads after a couple of landslides, I said yes, without thinking. They offered a per diem and covered lodging, which for a single man with no ties meant I'd be living off free rent and hot gas station coffee for 3 weeks. They put me up in an old boarding house on the edge of Miller's Creek. It sat on a rise above the 2-lane, tucked between pines so thick you couldn't see the house from the road unless you knew where to look. Looked like something from another century, 3 stories. Tall, narrow windows, wraparound porch with moss-eaten rockers nobody sat in. The landlady was a woman named Mrs. Elkins, white-haired, soft-spoken, didn't say more than necessary. She showed me to my room on the 2nd floor and handed me a brass key with no number on it. "You'll be fine in here," she said, without looking me in the eye. The room had velvet wallpaper, burgundy with gold threading, and ceilings so high they made me feel small. There was a writing desk, a faded blue rug, and a bed that groaned when I sat on it but didn't complain. The first couple days were uneventful. I'd drive out into the hills before dawn, hike through half-eroded switchbacks and broken rock faces, mark my readings, then come back and eat something fried at the corner diner before heading upstairs to shower off the clay dust. The boarding house was quiet, always smelled faintly of mothballs and rosewater, and the other boarders, if there were any, kept to themselves. I thought I saw a man with a limp heading up the back stairs once, but I never saw him again. Then, around the 3rd evening, just as the sun dipped low and threw that last line of orange through the trees, I heard it. A scream. Not sharp or sudden, more like a slow wail, stretched long and low, like someone was trying not to scream and failing. It came from the wall behind my headboard. I froze mid-shirt change, listening hard. It didn't repeat, didn't rise or fall. Just one long sound that faded into silence. I waited still as death, until the hallway light flicked on outside my door. Mrs. Elkins, I assumed, making her rounds. The next day, I asked if the walls were thin. She looked at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. "You hear mice?" she asked. I shook my head and dropped it, but the sound came back. Next night, same time, just after dusk. Same wall, same shape of a scream. Always too long to be natural, but never loud. Not like someone wanting to be heard. More like someone had accepted they wouldn't be. I started paying closer attention. Turned the TV off. Keep the lights dim. Stared at the vents in the corner and the lines where the wallpaper puckered at the seams. Once, I even pressed my ear to the wall. The scream came again, and this time it felt like it passed through me. Like a tuning fork had been struck deep in the bones of the house, and I just happened to be standing where it resonated. No one else seemed to notice. I brought it up once at breakfast, when I ran into Mrs. Elkins in the kitchen, but she only smiled thinly and said, "This old place makes sounds. Don't let it get in your head." I noticed she didn't ask what I heard. By the end of the second week, I couldn't sleep. I'd started watching the walls. Not in the paranoid way. I wasn't scared, not exactly. It was more like I felt something was trying to reach through. Like the house had a memory it was trying to tell. And I was the only one listening. One night, I walked through the hallway with a flashlight. All the other doors were shut, no light spilling out from under them. At the far end of the second-floor corridor, near the linen closet, I noticed a panel on the wall that didn't quite match the rest. Same wallpaper, but warped at the edge, like it had been replaced. I ran my hand along the seam and felt the faintest give, like there was space behind it. I didn't open it that night. The scream came again, and this time it was closer, same tone, same length, but now it echoed slightly, as if it had moved into the vent system. I turned off the lights, crawled under the blanket like a child, and listened until sleep finally took me in the early hours. The next evening, after another long day mapping an old floodplain, I came back with a screwdriver and waited for dusk. I didn't eat, I didn't shower. I sat in the chair by the wall until the last trace of daylight left the windows, and then I heard it. But it wasn't a scream this time. Not exactly. It was humming, broken and low, like someone trying to remember a lullaby but forgetting the tune halfway through. I stood, crossed to the panel, and pressed my palm flat. The air behind it felt warmer than the room. I could feel the vibration, like a throat behind plaster. I pried the edge until the panel popped loose and swung open. Behind it was nothing but wood, old slats, dustless, like they'd been recently touched. In the center, nailed carefully into the middle beam, was a locket. Gold, shaped like a teardrop, slightly tarnished, and it was warm. I didn't pick it up, just stared, heart in my throat, unsure what exactly I was afraid of. Behind me, the scream returned, not from the wall, not from the panel, from inside the room. I turned slowly and there was nothing, no figure, no shadow, just the thin, trembling air and the faintest trace of that humming trailing off like smoke. I left the next morning, packed my things without breakfast, without saying goodbye. Mrs. Elkins watched me from the front steps, hands folded, didn't try to stop me, didn't ask why. A week later, I got a call from a man in the county records office. He needed clarification on a few elevations I'd marked. Casual talk. Before he hung up, I asked him if he knew the boarding house out on Ridge Hollow Road. He paused. "You mean the old Mercer place?" I told him maybe. He said it hadn't been a boarding house in years. Not since the late 70s. Some kind of incident. A woman went missing, boarder, young. Her family came looking, but no one could prove anything. The owners moved out after the investigation, and the place sat vacant for decades. I asked if the name Elkins meant anything. He said no. I've tried to look the place up since. Google Maps won't load that part of the road, just spins. I've asked around on message boards, dropped hints in hiker forums, but no one seems to know what I'm talking about. I still have dreams of the scream. Not nightmares, just vivid echoes. Sometimes it's behind a wall, sometimes inside my own chest, but always the same shape, long, quiet, and sorrowful, like someone who's been waiting to be found for so long they forgot their name. Story 6. The house that played my dreams. It was supposed to be a second chance. We'd been together 5 years, separated for 6 months, and had this quiet, unspoken hope that a week in the mountains could maybe wash off what had gone wrong. Her name was Rachel, and she found the listing. An old mountain house near Blowing Rock with a fireplace, stone path, ivy-draped chimney, and no cell reception. That part she liked most, said maybe without the buzz of the world we could actually hear each other again. So we drove up with a few bags and that tired kind of hope people carry when they're not sure if they're fixing something or just saying goodbye slower. The place looked better in person, I'll admit. It had that weathered beauty, the kind you don't build anymore. Wood that had gone silver from rain and age. Iron hardware that clicked into place with a sound that made your teeth remember things. The interior was small but warm. There were rugs that looked hand-woven, and the hearth smelled faintly of ash and pine sap. The first night we made a fire, shared wine in chipped mugs, and didn't fight. That felt like progress. But then I dreamed. It wasn't like most dreams, fuzzy and fractured. This one was clean, like a film reel you didn't realize had already started. I was standing in the kitchen, and water was seeping up through the floorboards. Not gushing, just rising slowly and patiently. Everything stayed still, but the water kept coming. First the baseboards vanished, then the table legs. Dishes floated, chairs tipped. It reached my knees, then my chest. I tried to move, but it felt like the water wanted me still, like it needed to rise undisturbed. When it reached my mouth, I didn't fight. I just breathed it in. I woke up choking. Rachel was asleep beside me, unaware. The fire had gone cold. I didn't tell her. The second night, the dream came again. Same house, same water, but this time, I started in the hallway. I could see the living room already flooded, water licking at the mantel. I walked toward it even though some part of me whispered to turn back. I didn't. I watched a picture frame float past my shoulder and break silently against a wall. I wasn't scared in the dream. I felt expected, like the house had been waiting. The next morning, Rachel noticed I was quiet. I blamed it on the altitude, the lack of sleep. We hiked that day. I talked a little, but there was distance, the kind that makes every kindness feel like an apology. That night, after we ate, I lingered by the hearth while she went to bed. The fire crackled soft. I swear I heard something just beneath the wood's hiss, a faint sloshing. I moved closer, put my hand on the stone, and it was damp. Just for a second, just enough to doubt yourself. The third night, I didn't fall asleep. I slipped into the dream. That's the only way I can explain it. One moment I was lying in bed staring at the ceiling, and the next I was underwater. This time I was in the upstairs hallway. I floated gently down the stairs, hair trailing behind me like seaweed. The house was darker now. The furniture moved slowly, brushing against walls like it was looking for something. I reached out, tried to open the front door, but it was sealed shut with vines. I wasn't breathing. I didn't need to. I woke up gasping, shirt clinging to my back. Rachel stirred beside me. "You're sweating again," she murmured. I nodded and didn't say it wasn't sweet. Day 4, the air felt different, more humid. The floorboards under my bare feet were cool and tacky, like something had seeped into them. Rachel was tense. Said she kept dreaming we were in a house that wasn't ours. Said she'd hear me talking in my sleep, whispering things she didn't understand. I wanted to deny it, but I couldn't. There was a thin, sour smell in the bedroom that hadn't been there before, like standing water in an old basin. That night, I woke up soaked, my side of the bed, drenched, mattress squishing beneath me, sheets clinging to my skin. But there was no storm, no broken pipe, no condensation. I flipped on the lamp, and the water was gone. Just a damp stain spreading like a bruise across the sheets. Rachel was still asleep, dry and untouched. I touched her arm to wake her, but her skin was ice cold. I stayed awake the rest of the night. The fire had burned out again, but the sound remained. From inside the walls, from beneath the floorboards, faint lapping, like something brushing slowly against the foundation over and over. I pressed my ear to the hearthstone, and the sound was louder. Water hitting stone over and over like waves inside the house. I left the fire cold and went outside, barefoot on the stone path, just to breathe air that didn't taste like mildew. The stars were gone, the sky choked with clouds but no rain. I walked around to the side of the house and found the ivy climbing higher than before. It clung to the second story now, reaching toward the eaves like it was trying to cover the whole thing. I looked up at the bedroom window. There was someone standing there, not Rachel, not me, just a shape staring down, still as a painting. I stepped back, heart crawling up my throat, and the figure didn't move. No reaction, just watching. I didn't go back inside, not for a while. I sat on the porch until morning, and when I finally opened the door again, the house felt different. Dry, sure, quiet, but expectant. Rachel made coffee and didn't mention the wet bed or the stain that had vanished. She looked tired, but not surprised. We didn't talk about leaving. That's the part I still can't explain. We should have. Every instinct in me said to pack up and drive, but we stayed. Like the idea of leaving had been removed from us while we slept. On the final night, I couldn't keep my eyes open. Exhaustion overtook me in waves, and I slipped under like I was being pulled down. The house was full. Every room, every hallway, every stair, black water to the ceiling, and I was floating through it all, past doors I hadn't opened, past walls covered in moss and mold. The furniture was gone. In its place were things I'd forgotten, old toys from childhood, photos I hadn't seen in years, faces of people I'd known only briefly. They floated beside me, staring blankly. The front door was open now, but what lay beyond it was more water, endless, black, still. Then I saw Rachel. She wasn't moving, just drifting near the ceiling, hair fanned out, eyes open and empty. I reached for her, screamed, but the sound was swallowed. The house pulsed around me like it was breathing, like it was listening. I woke up on the floor. Rachel was gone. No note, no suitcase, no sign of packing. The truck keys were still on the table, but her hiking boots were missing. I called for her, searched the woods, the creek, the trail we'd walked. Nothing, just trees and silence. I called for help, finally got service at a turnout 6 miles down the road. The sheriff came, took notes, and asked questions I didn't have answers to. They searched the property, found no signs of struggle, no wet bedding, no fingerprints but mine. Said she probably walked off after an argument, maybe got lost. I told them about the dreams, about the water, about the house holding us. They looked at me like I'd been out in the sun too long. They never found her. I think about that house more than I should. Not what it was, but what it wanted. It didn't keep her the way people keep things. It absorbed her, like a memory sinking into the walls. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I hear water again. And sometimes, just as I'm falling asleep, I feel the mattress grow damp beneath me, like something's risen to the surface, waiting. Story 7. The room with the locked cradle. When Leah's grandmother passed, she inherited the old farmhouse up near Elkin, tucked just outside the tree line where the grass turns thin and the road turns to gravel. I'd been there once as a kid, couldn't have been more than 8, but I remembered the place. Always smelled like cold wood and something sour. Her grandma, Etta, had lived alone for the last 20 years, just her and the barn cats, with only one working light in the whole house. When Leah asked if I'd come help clean it up so she could maybe sell it, I said yes before thinking too much. Mostly just wanted to get out of town for a few days. We got there in early spring. Trees hadn't bloomed yet. But the air was soft with that kind of hush that only comes after a hard winter. The house looked tired. Porch slumped like a bad back. Shutters missing. Chimney cracked. But it was standing. Inside, it was all yellowed wallpaper, dusty cabinets, and furniture covered in sheets. There were 5 rooms upstairs. I took the one at the end of the hall, since Leah said that one hadn't been used in years. The smell hit me the moment I opened the door. Not rot, not mold, something else. Like warm milk that had been left in the sun mixed with cedar shavings. I opened the window, but the scent didn't leave. It was buried deep, like it lived in the floorboards. That first night, I couldn't sleep. Something about the room kept me tense, like it had breath. I kept staring at the corner, where a cradle sat tucked under the eave. It was the old-fashioned kind, hand-carved maybe, oak, rocking legs, high curved sides. The only thing was, it had a rusted chain wrapped tight around it. 3 loops through the bars, padlocked shut. I asked Leah about it the next morning. She barely looked up from the sink. "It's always been like that," she said. "Gran told me not to mess with it, said it stayed locked for a reason. I laughed it off, but it sat wrong with me. Why keep a cradle if you're never going to use it? Why lock it at all?" The second night I heard the tapping, just after midnight. When the wind had gone still and the frogs in the creek below had stopped chirping, there came this faint sound. Tap, 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 like fingernails on old wood. It was so soft I thought maybe I'd imagined it. I held my breath and listened. Tap. This time I saw the cradle shift, just a hair. Just enough that the moonlight caught the grain differently. I told myself it was settling, that the floor was uneven. I turned on the lamp and stared at it until I fell asleep with the bulb still burning. The next day I asked again. Leah shrugged. It always did that. Used to freak me out when I slept over. Gran said not to worry, said some things weren't meant to be remembered. That night, I couldn't ignore it. It started earlier, around 10. I hadn't even turned off the light yet when the tapping began. This time it was followed by a creak, a long, deliberate shift of weight, like someone slowly sitting up in bed. I froze. The room went cold even though the windows were shut. My eyes wouldn't leave the cradle. It rocked again, one gentle sway forward, then back. I got out of bed and walked over slowly, each board beneath me protesting. The chain was still tight, lock unmoved. I leaned in close, listening. Something breathed inside. I backed away and didn't sleep, just sat in the chair until morning bled through the curtains. By the 4th day, Leah noticed the bags under my eyes. I told her everything. Instead of laughing, she got quiet. "There's a photo in the attic," she said. "I'll show you tonight." When the sun went down, we climbed up through the ceiling hatch into a space thick with dust and insulation. She dug through a box labeled Etta's Things and pulled out a brittle old photo in a cracked frame. It showed a baby, bald, pale, wrapped in a lace blanket, lying in that same cradle. Leah pointed to the bottom corner where someone had scrawled a name. Calvan. I asked if she had any cousins named Calvan. She shook her head. Gran never talked about a baby, just said her room had to stay locked after the accident. I asked what happened. She didn't answer. That night, I brought bolt cutters. I waited until after Leah went to bed. The house was quiet again. Still as dust. I sat in front of the cradle for a long while, cutters in my lap, unsure of what I thought I was doing. The tapping came. Soft at first, then eager, like it knew. I clipped the chain, the links fell heavy to the floor. The cradle creaked slightly. I reached for the lock and pried it open. The final loop of rusted iron dropped, and the cradle rocked once, gently. Inside was a bundle of cloth, white, yellowed with age. I peeled it back, and there they were, teeth, hundreds of them, baby small, but adult-shaped. Too many for any one person. Neat little piles, polished like river stones, some stained, some cracked, but all real. And beneath them, at the very bottom, was something that looked like a rattle, only it was hollow. When I shook it, the sound was wet. I backed away, bile in my throat, and the cradle rocked on its own again. I left the room and slept in my truck. Leah tried to move the cradle the next morning. It wouldn't budge, like it had sunk into the floor. I don't know what that room held, don't know what her grandmother did, but I know I was never supposed to open it. And some nights, quiet nights, when the air is still, I hear the faintest tap, 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 and feel something sharp behind my gums. Story 8, The Staircase That Returned at Night. I worked the night shift at a hospice just outside Waynesville. The place used to be a manor back in the early 1900s. Coal money, I think, before it got turned into something quieter. You could still see pieces of what it used to be. Carved banisters, gaslight sconces that had been rewired but never removed, creaking floorboards that echoed too long. There was one hallway we never used, the west wing. It had been sealed decades ago after a fire collapsed part of the floor. They bricked it off, saying there was no point in rebuilding. Still, every so often during rounds, I'd hear footsteps down there, faint but deliberate, wood on wood, like someone pacing above a stage. I blamed it on pipes or my own tired head. That wing was supposed to be gone after all, but it kept happening, always late. Always when the halls got too quiet. One night in November, I turned the corner to do my usual check, and the wall was gone. Where brick had been for years, there was now a wide staircase, just sitting there like it never left. Dust layered the railing, cobwebs stretched between balusters, but it was real. I touched the banister, it left grit on my skin. The air smelled dry, like ash and wet plaster. I stood there, maybe 10 feet from it, pulse crawling up my neck. I wanted to call someone, but I didn't move. Then I heard it. A single step creaked above me. Then another. Then another. The sound came slowly, one deliberate footfall at a time, moving downward. No hurry, just rhythm. Like whoever, or whatever it was, had done this before. I backed up. The hallway felt longer somehow, the air thicker. I watched the top of the stairs, waiting to see something shift, some figure leaning forward. But nothing came into view, only the steps creaking toward me.